Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. My wife Natalie and I bought our house in Oakwood Heights 2 years ago. It's a nice neighborhood, well-maintained homes, good schools nearby, and generally friendly people. The HOA fees were reasonable, and their rules seemed pretty standard when we moved in. We even went to a few board meetings early on just to get a feel for how things worked. Everything was fine until about 6 months ago when I decided to install solar panels on our roof. With energy prices going up and some great tax incentives available, it seemed like the perfect time to make the switch to solar. I did everything by the book, got multiple quotes from reputable companies, checked local regulations, and submitted all the required paperwork to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. That's when I first met Patricia Morrison, though everyone just called her Pat. She'd recently been elected as HOA president and took her position very seriously. Too seriously, as it turned out. The day after I submitted my solar panel application, she showed up at my door unannounced. "Mr. Roberts," she said, peering at me through designer glasses. "We need to discuss your solar panel application." I invited her in, trying to be neighborly. "Sure, what seems to be the problem?" Pat settled herself on our couch like she owned the place. "Well, there are several concerns. First, solar panels are an eyesore that will decrease property values. Second, they'll reflect glare into other homes. And third," she paused for dramatic effect, "they'll block natural sunlight from reaching neighboring properties." I blinked at her, wondering if I'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what? The panels will be flat against my roof. They can't possibly block anyone's sunlight." "That's where you're wrong," Pat declared, pulling out a folder full of papers. "I've done extensive research on this. Solar panels absorb sunlight that would otherwise be reflected off your roof and into neighboring yards. You're essentially stealing their sunlight." I tried not to laugh, really I did, but a small chuckle escaped anyway. Pat's face turned red. "This is no laughing matter, Mr. Roberts. As HOA president, it's my duty to protect all residents' rights to natural resources. I'm denying your application." I took a deep breath and pulled out my own folder. "Actually, Pat, under state law, SB 234, HOAs cannot prohibit the installation of solar panels. They can impose reasonable restrictions on placement, but they can't outright deny them." She stood up abruptly. "We'll see about that. Expect to hear from our lawyer." True to her word, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney 3 days later. But they must have actually read the law because the letter merely listed some reasonable restrictions about panel placement and color. I agreed to all of them. They were basically what I'd planned anyway. The installation was scheduled for the following month. The morning the crew arrived, Pat was out there with her clipboard taking photos and notes. I watched from my home office window as she circled my house multiple times, muttering to herself. The crew leader came to get me around lunchtime. "Sir, that lady keeps trying to tell us we need to stop work," he said, looking uncomfortable. "She says she's calling the police if we don't." I grabbed my permit paperwork and headed outside. Pat was on her phone, gesturing wildly. "Yes, officer, they're installing illegal structures without proper permits," she was saying. I waited until she finished her call. "Pat, I have all the required permits right here. Would you like to see them?" "Those permits were obtained under false pretenses," she snapped. "You never disclosed that these panels would steal sunlight from other properties." I felt a headache coming on. "Pat, that's not how solar panels work. They don't steal sunlight. They just absorb what hits them directly, just like any roof would." "Well, my roses are going to die because of you," she shouted, pointing to her backyard. "Those panels will block all their light." I looked where she was pointing. Her rose garden was a good 50 feet away from my house, on the opposite side from where the panels were being installed. "That's physically impossible," I explained. "The panels are facing south, your garden is to the north. They'll never interact with each other." Pat stormed off without another word. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, checked our permits, and left. The installation was completed by evening. For the next week, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, as it turned out. Pat was plotting her revenge. I came home from work one afternoon to find Pat in my backyard with a garden hose, spraying water up at my solar panels. She had the spray nozzle set to the highest pressure setting and was systematically targeting each panel. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, running over to stop her. "Cleaning your panels," she said with a maniacal grin. "They're looking a bit dirty. Wouldn't want them stealing sunlight inefficiently." I grabbed the hose from her hands. "Get off my property right now, or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," she taunted. "I'm doing you a favor. Besides, how else am I supposed to water my plants with all my sunlight being stolen?" I called the police while she continued ranting about her dying roses. When the officers arrived, they gave her a warning for trespassing but didn't do much else. Pat left, but the damage was already done. The high-pressure water had caused several hairline cracks in 2 of my panels. I documented everything and called my insurance company the next day. They sent out an inspector who confirmed the damage was deliberate vandalism. The repair estimate came to $2,800, but Pat wasn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, she escalated her campaign against my solar panels. She started sending daily violation notices claiming the panels were not in compliance with HOA rules. She tried to pass new bylaws specifically restricting solar panel usage. She even went door to door telling neighbors that their gardens would die because my panels were stealing all the sunlight. The final straw came when I installed security cameras after the hose incident. 2 days later, they caught Pat throwing rocks at my panels at 5:30 in the morning. The video showed her methodically working her way across my roof, pelting each panel with stones. This time, she managed to completely shatter 3 panels before I could call the police. That's when I decided enough was enough. I hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against both Pat personally and the HOA for harassment and property damage. The security footage was damning evidence, and my lawyer also subpoenaed Pat's emails to other board members where she discussed her vendetta against my solar panels. The court date was set for last week. Pat showed up with an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that she was acting in her official capacity as HOA president to enforce community standards. That defense fell apart pretty quickly when my lawyer presented evidence that the HOA's own architectural committee had approved my installation. Then Pat tried to present her research about solar panels stealing sunlight. The judge's expression was priceless. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, removing his glasses, "are you seriously arguing that solar panels on Mr. Roberts' roof are somehow stealing sunlight from your property?" "Yes, Your Honor," Pat declared. "I have documentation proving that his panels are absorbing sunlight that should be reflecting onto my property. My roses are dying because of his greed." The judge rubbed his temples. "Mrs. Morrison, that is not how solar panels or sunlight works. Do you have any actual evidence of damage to your property?" Pat's lawyer tried to intervene, but she pushed ahead. "Just look at these photos of my rose garden. They're barely growing at all." My lawyer then presented photos showing that Pat's roses were, in fact, thriving. He also had testimony from a local landscaper explaining that the panels couldn't possibly affect her garden given their location and orientation. The judge had heard enough. He ruled in my favor, ordering Pat to pay for all damages to my solar panels, now totaling over $6,000 with the second incident, plus my legal fees. He also issued an injunction barring her from interfering with my solar installation in any way, but the real justice came from the HOA board itself. After the lawsuit, they called an emergency meeting to address Pat's behavior. Turns out many residents were fed up with her power trips, and this solar panel fiasco was the last straw. They voted to remove her as president and banned her from serving on the board again. Pat put her house up for sale the next day. I heard through the grapevine that she's moving to a condo with no HOA, probably for the best. The new HOA board is actually quite reasonable, and they've even started promoting solar panel installation as an environmentally friendly initiative. My panels are working great now that they're repaired. I'm saving about $200 a month on electricity, and several neighbors have asked for recommendations on solar companies. Even Pat's next-door neighbor is installing panels, though I hear Pat had a meltdown when she found out. The best part? Pat's roses are still blooming beautifully, somehow surviving despite all that stolen sunlight. I make sure to point that out to anyone who asks about the infamous solar panel battle of Oakwood Heights. I've learned a few lessons from this whole ordeal. 1. Always know your rights and the law. 2. Document everything. 3. Install security cameras sooner rather than later. 4. Some people will never understand basic science, no matter how many times you explain it. At least I got a great story out of it, even if it did cost me some time and stress. And hey, maybe Pat will learn something about solar power in her new condo. Though somehow I doubt it. Edit. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions. Yes, I'm still saving money even after repair costs since insurance covered most of it. Pat really did believe solar panels could steal sunlight from other properties. My lawyer is keeping the video footage of her throwing rocks just in case. The new HOA board is much better about approving home improvements. Edit 2. Several people have asked about Pat's roses. Yes, they're still thriving, and the new owners of her house plan to keep the garden. Ironic, isn't it? Update. It's been 6 months since my last post, and wow, has a lot happened. I figured you all deserve to know how this crazy situation turned out. First off, Pat never did pay the damages herself. She tried to declare bankruptcy to avoid it. But here's the thing. My lawyer had already put a lien on her house, so when she sold it, I got paid from the proceeds. The look on her face at closing when she realized this was priceless. The new HOA board has been amazing. Remember how I mentioned they were promoting solar panels? Well, they went even further. They hired an actual environmental consultant to create guidelines for sustainable home improvements. We now have 15 houses with solar panels in the neighborhood, and there's a waiting list for installation. But the real karma came from Pat's new condo situation. You're not going to believe this. Last month, I ran into Pat's former next-door neighbor, Linda, at the grocery store. She told me Pat's new condo is on the ground floor of a 6-story building, and guess what's on the roof? A massive solar array that powers the entire building. When Pat found out during move-in, she apparently threw such a fit that the condo board had to call security. She kept screaming about how the panels were stealing her sunlight even though they're 5 floors above her, Linda told me, barely containing her laughter. The condo manager tried to explain that the panels actually reduce everyone's electricity bills, but Pat wouldn't listen. Pat tried to rally her new neighbors against the solar array, going door to door just like she did here, but it backfired spectacularly. The condo board called a special meeting to address her complaints, where the building's engineer gave a presentation about how solar power works. Pat stood up to argue and ended up embarrassing herself in front of everyone. "The sun is a finite resource," she apparently yelled. "These panels are depleting it faster than it can replenish." She got laughed out of the meeting. Now her neighbors call her Solar Karen, and someone even made a meme about her that's circulating in their building's Facebook group. But here's my favorite part. Remember those rose bushes she was so worried about? The new owners of her house here, Tom and Maria, are actually botanists. They've expanded the rose garden and added a whole butterfly garden too. And right next to it, they installed their own solar panels last month. They invited the whole neighborhood over for a garden party last weekend to show off their improvements. The roses are absolutely thriving under their care, even with twice as many solar panels nearby. Someone suggested we take a photo of the blooming roses with the panels in the background and send it to Pat. We didn't actually do it, but it was tempting. The HOA drama has died down completely since Pat left. Our new board president, Mike, is a retired engineer who's been incredibly supportive of green energy initiatives. He's even working with the city to get group discounts for solar installation in our neighborhood. My solar panels are working better than ever. The new installation company the HOA recommends did some upgrades while repairing the damage Pat caused, and I'm now generating about 20% more power than before. My latest electric bill was negative $15. The power company had to pay me. The security cameras I installed have stayed up, though they haven't caught anything more exciting than a family of raccoons since Pat left. Still, better safe than sorry. One interesting development. Our story apparently made its way to the state legislature. A representative used it as an example while arguing for a bill that strengthens protections for homeowners installing solar panels. The bill passed last month, making it even harder for HOAs to restrict solar installation. I did have one last indirect interaction with Pat. Her lawyer contacted mine trying to get the security footage of her vandalizing my panels taken down from the police evidence files. Apparently, she's worried it might affect her chances of getting on her condo board. My lawyer's response was perfect. Your client's concerns about sunlight theft seem to have finally seen the light of day. The evidence stays in the file? The footage has actually been useful. The police department now uses it in their training sessions about handling HOA disputes. One officer told me they've titled it, "How Not to Be a Solar Karen." Pat's old lawyer even apologized to me at a local bar association event. He admitted he tried to talk her out of her sunlight theft defense, but she insisted. He said in 20 years of practicing law, this was the most embarrassing case he'd ever been involved with. The whole experience has had some unexpected positive effects on our community. The HOA now hosts monthly educational sessions about various home improvement topics. Last week's session on sustainable landscaping was packed. We've also started a community garden in the empty lot behind the clubhouse, with solar-powered irrigation, of course. Our neighborhood has become something of a model for other HOAs in the area. 3 other communities have contacted our board about implementing similar solar-friendly policies. There's even talk of creating a local coalition of environmentally conscious HOAs. As for me, I've become the unofficial solar guy in the neighborhood. People constantly ask me for advice about installation, and I'm happy to help. It feels good to turn such a negative experience into something positive for the community. Tom and Maria, the new owners of Pat's house, have invited me to be part of their garden club. The irony of helping tend those same roses that Pat was so sure would die because of my solar panels isn't lost on me. They're planning to enter the garden in a local competition next spring. For those wondering about legal loose ends, Pat tried to appeal the court's decision, but was denied. She also attempted to file a complaint with the state's housing board, claiming discrimination against solar skeptics. Yes, really. They dismissed it immediately. The security company that installed my cameras gave me a discount on an annual maintenance contract. They were so impressed by how the footage helped win my case that they now use it in their marketing materials, with my permission and faces blurred, of course. I've had several people suggest I write a book about the experience, but I think I'll stick to my day job, though how to deal with a solar Karen does have a nice ring to it. The best outcome of all this? Our electricity costs as a neighborhood have dropped significantly since more houses installed solar panels. The money we're saving on power has allowed the HOA to approve some great community improvements without raising dues. We're getting a new playground and walking trail next spring. So I guess in the end, Pat's crusade against solar power actually helped promote it more than any planned initiative could have. Sometimes the best advertising is an absolutely ridiculous opponent. Life is pretty peaceful now. The panels are working great, the roses are blooming, and our community is stronger than ever. I still get a chuckle every time I look up at my roof and think about Pat's sunlight theft theory. Maybe someday she'll learn how solar power actually works, but I'm not holding my breath. At least now when the sun shines, it's powering our homes instead of fueling HOA drama, and that's worth every bit of hassle it took to get here. Edit. Thanks for all the awards and comments. To answer the most common question, yes, Pat really did try to argue that the sun is a finite resource that we're using up too fast. The judge's face was absolutely priceless. Edit 2. Several people have asked for the security camera footage. Sorry, but it's still part of an active police file. However, I hear the police training video they made about HOA disputes might be available through a public records request. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Mobile phones became common in my country around 2004, just as I finished high school. My parents bought me my first phone, a second-hand Nokia. It was bulky and basic, but I promised myself that someday I'd buy a new phone with my own money. When college started, I had a 2-hour daily commute. In high school, I had excelled academically and won several district-level awards. These awards were being distributed during my first year of college. One nationalized bank award finally gave me enough money for a new phone. I bought a Sony Ericsson K300i and a premium SIM card, not realizing it had been abandoned by its previous owner. By the third day, I started receiving calls for a guy named Bitsa from various financial institutions. It turned out the number previously belonged to him, and for 20 years, I've been getting these calls. Determined to keep my premium number, I began a routine of blocking wrong numbers. Back then, blocking was device-specific, so each time I got a new phone, I had to start over, keeping a list of numbers to block. I got my first job after graduating in 2009. Around 2010, I was assigned to a new project with a notorious reputation for burning people out due to a nefarious project manager named Bits. I didn't know his full name for quite a while. He took pride in making our lives a living hell. Bits ruled with an iron fist. From the moment his team stepped into the office, they were met with a barrage of emails and messages, each more urgent than the last. Bits thrived on creating chaos, often changing project deadlines on a whim, demanding his team work late into the night and through weekends. Bits' presence loomed over every task. He insisted on micromanaging every detail, yet was quick to take credit for any successes, no matter how small. Failures, however, were met with his notorious tirades, publicly berating his team and assigning blame without hesitation. His unpredictable temper kept everyone on edge, afraid to make the slightest mistake. Meetings were another tool in his arsenal of torment. He scheduled them during lunch breaks and after hours, ensuring no one could escape his grasp. These meetings were often pointless, serving only to reinforce his dominance and disrupt any semblance of work-life balance his team might have had. His relentless stream of emails continued around the clock, each carrying a thinly veiled threat, perfection or dismissal. Under his reign, morale plummeted and burnout soared, yet Bits remained oblivious, satisfied only by his complete and total control. I was quite ashamed when I learned that he was from the same area as I was and had gone to the same school, though years before me. In 2012, our company merged with a parent company. Almost nothing changed personnel-wise, but infrastructure-wise, we got MS Outlook and an organization view. That was when I first learned about Bits from an organizational hierarchy perspective. His full name was an eye-opener. It was Bitsa. Now, the name was common enough, but at the time, mobile numbers had an area-specific pattern, so I already knew that the previous owner of my number was from the same area as me. Still, it could be someone else. I wanted to dig deeper. I talked with an old mentor who lived in the same area and had coached several high school students for the last 2 decades. He confirmed my suspicions. I won't go into the details, but it was evident that Bitsa and Bits were the same person. I had been quite pissed with this unknown person named Bitsa for almost a decade by then, and Bits had been the bane of my and several others' existence for quite some time. This is where the revenge lies. First, I unblocked all the numbers in my phone. I was getting 6 calls daily on average, but after unblocking about 150 numbers, it increased to 18. My answering strategy changed drastically. Instead of saying wrong number, I politely explained that the owner had changed his number and provided his current number to update their database. This is where I could be the AH. I also volunteered his manager's number in case he tries something else. The fallout was epic. These people had been trying to find him for almost a decade. Banks had sold his debts to companies that harass people for a living to get their money back. It turned out he had been taking loans in everyone's names, his wife, parents, uncles, aunts, and giving everyone that same number. He was evading credit card debt and loans of upwards of $200K, equivalent in USD, but it's a shitload of money where we are from. Apparently, he had almost 20 cases filed against him, but no one could find him. Probably why he thought he could walk on water. There are multiple versions of what happened at the office. When his manager started to get calls about him, he was let go about 2 months later, haven't heard from him since.